My daughter called me selfish for not handing over the keys to our family lake house for her honeymoon. She said, "You don't even use it anymore. Why let it rot?" But here's the kicker. She never invited me to the wedding. She sent photos the next day like it was a casual brunch. And now she wants the one place that holds every memory we made together, as if I'm just the gatekeeper of her inheritance. But this story isn't about a mother feeling left out. No, it's about betrayal. The kind that hides behind a perfect smile and calls you mom while filing paperwork to steal what's yours. You think you know your child until you discover the truth. And once you do, the only question left is, how far will you go to protect what's sacred? My name is Margaret Thompson, and I've spent the past 67 years living a life that many would describe as simple, even predictable. I was a school teacher for nearly 4 decades, the kind of teacher who baked muffins for the faculty lounge and stayed late to help struggling students with their reading. I married my high school sweetheart David, a quiet man who loved jazz and crossword puzzles. We built a life together in a modest house, raised a daughter, and took summer trips to a little lake house we saved for over the years, Willow Cottage. That place wasn't just wood and paint, it was our memory bank. Every summer of Elena's childhood was etched into those floors, those window panes. Fireflies, pancakes on the porch, first swim lessons in the cold water that made her shriek with delight. David passed away when Elena was just 10 years old, a heart attack, sudden, cruel. One moment he was tying her shoes before school, and the next I was signing paperwork I couldn't comprehend. The grief was a tidal wave, but there was no time to drown in it. I had a daughter to raise and a world to keep turning. So I did what mothers do. I stitched myself back together one cracked seam at a time. Every choice I made from that moment on was about her. I poured all the love I had left into that girl, every drop of it. Elena was bright, determined, and wildly curious. She asked questions most kids didn't. She challenged rules. She wanted to know why things were the way they were, and if they could be better. I saw so much of David in her, his quiet tenacity, his stubborn streak when she believed she was right. But the tenderness, that was mine. She used to crawl into bed with me after bad dreams, whispering, "Mom, you're my safest place." When she got into law school, we cried together on the front steps of our house. I remember her hands trembling as she held the acceptance letter. "We did it, Mom," she said. "Not I, but we." And I believed her. I believed that all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the second job, the worn-out shoes, meant something to her. That belief became my anchor. She graduated top of her class, moved to Boston, got a job at a prestigious firm, and sent me photos of her office with floor-to-ceiling windows. We started a tradition, Sunday calls. No matter what, she'd call. Sometimes it was 5 minutes between meetings, sometimes an hour as she cooked dinner and vented about case law or terrible takeout. We laughed, we bickered, we stayed close. When she was 30, she brought home a man named Aaron for the holidays. He was polite, mild, forgettable. They lasted 6 months. Then there was Jonah, who lasted a year. She'd call me crying when things fell apart, and I'd tell her what mothers always do. "You are worthy. You are loved. This isn't the end." We had our rhythms, our inside jokes, our holidays at Willow Cottage, just the two of us. She always said it was the one place she could breathe. So when she met someone new, Garrett, I didn't panic. She was older, wiser now. I figured if she liked him, I'd learn to like him too. But more than anything, I trusted her. Elena was my daughter, my mirror, my legacy. If you had asked me even a year ago what I feared most, I'd have said illness or losing mobility. Growing old alone, maybe. But I've learned since then that the deepest kind of heartbreak isn't losing your health. It's realizing the person you love most may no longer be who you thought they were. That realization didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, like a slow unraveling of a favorite sweater. But in the beginning, in this chapter, there was still trust, still warmth, still a daughter who called me mom like it was the safest word she knew. Back then, I still believed we were unbreakable. It started with the calls, or rather, the lack of them. Our Sunday tradition, once sacred, began to waver. First it was a reschedule, then a voicemail, then nothing at all. Busy week, she'd text. Client dinner or running on fumes, will call soon. I didn't push. I told myself this was what life looked like for a successful woman in her 30s. The world pulled at her from all directions, and I should be proud she was in such high demand. Still, I'd sit on the porch at Willow Cottage, phone in hand, waiting for a ring that didn't come. When we did talk, something had shifted. Her tone was clipped, distracted, like I was a task she needed to check off her list. Gone were the stories about odd coworkers or courtroom drama. Instead, the conversations were transactional, updates, logistics, plans without warmth. "I'll try to visit soon," she'd say. "Things are just hectic right now." I'd ask if everything was all right, and she'd insist she was fine. But mothers know. We know when something isn't being said. I chalked it up to stress, maybe burnout. Boston was a hard city to thrive in. Maybe her firm was pressuring her. I even wondered if there was a new man she hadn't mentioned. I told myself not to take it personally, that seasons change, and maybe this was just one of those seasons. But then came the day that cracked everything open. It was early spring, the kind of day where the air smelled like thawing earth and possibility. I was tending the rose bushes out front when my neighbor, Linda, strolled over with her usual morning coffee. We exchanged pleasantries, and just as she was turning to leave, she paused. "Oh, by the way, Maggie, I saw Elena's engagement photos online. Congratulations, he's very handsome." I looked up from my garden gloves. "I'm sorry, what?" Linda blinked. "You didn't know?" I must have laughed. One of those strange, brittle laughs that try to mask a gut punch. "Photos where?" "On her Instagram. A beautiful ring. She looks radiant." I mumbled something and excused myself, hands still dirty with soil. Inside, I opened my laptop with trembling fingers. I didn't have Instagram, but I knew how to look. There it was. A photo of Elena, standing in front of a fountain I didn't recognize, holding up her hand with a diamond that sparkled like it belonged to someone else. She was smiling, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Garrett stood beside her, arm possessively around her waist. The caption read, "Forever started with yes." There were hundreds of comments, heart emojis, congratulations, even a few tags I didn't understand. But what I understood was this: my daughter had gotten engaged, and I had found out from the woman who shared my fence line. I stared at that photo for a long time, like if I looked hard enough, it might explain everything, might tell me why she hadn't called, why she hadn't told me herself. I tried to recall the last time we'd spoken. A week ago? 10 days? Had she said anything? With hands still shaking, I picked up the phone and dialed. She answered on the third ring. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" I kept my voice steady. "I was just wondering if you had any news to share." A pause. "News? I saw your engagement photo." Another pause. "Oh, right." There was no gasp, no apology, no laughter over the idea that she'd meant to call. Just those 3 syllables. Flat, unaffected. "You weren't going to tell me?" "It happened fast," she said. "Garrett surprised me last weekend. It was spontaneous. We were going to call you. I was going to. But then things got busy." "Busy?" She exhaled, irritated. "Mom, it's not that big of a deal. I don't know why you're making this dramatic." I swallowed the heat rising in my throat. "I'm making this dramatic? I just mean, it's my life, my relationship. You've always had such strong opinions about who I date. I wanted to enjoy this privately before inviting all the commentary. Elena, I've supported you every step of your life." "And I'm grateful," she said, voice hardening. "But this is different. This is mine. You don't need to worry." She may as well have said, "You don't belong here anymore." The call ended quickly after that. I sat in silence, the weight of a million memories pressing against my chest. The first time she walked, her graduation day, the birthday cake I stayed up all night making when she was 7, and now she was engaged to a man I barely knew, and I was no longer part of her story. The days that followed felt hollow. I moved through them as if underwater, slow, heavy, muted. Every time I passed the photo of Elena on the mantel, age 7, gap-toothed and holding up a finger painting of us holding hands under a rainbow, I wondered where that little girl had gone. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, that she was overwhelmed, that once the dust settled, she'd call, she'd explain, we'd laugh about it someday. So I baked. I weeded. I reread letters David had written me when we were young, back when love was simpler and people said what they meant. I left the porch light on later than usual, just in case she drove up spontaneously the way she used to, but the phone stayed silent. No text, no voicemail, just digital quiet. A week later, she finally called. "Hey, Mom," she said, her tone breezy, too bright. "I have a favor to ask." My heart did a little stutter, like it always did when I thought maybe, just maybe, she wanted to talk. Really talk. I tried to sound normal. "Of course, what's up?" "Well, Garrett and I are planning a little getaway, just a quick honeymoon thing after the ceremony." A pause. "Oh?" I said carefully. "You're having the wedding soon?" She cleared her throat. "Actually, we decided to skip the whole big event. Too much pressure. We already signed the papers. Just something private. Us and a few friends. Very low-key. No invitation, no mention of family. Just signed the papers." "I see," I said softly. "Well, congratulations. I hope it was everything you dreamed." "Thanks," she said, quickly moving on. "Anyway, we were thinking, would it be okay to use Willow Cottage for the weekend? Just Friday to Monday. Garrett's always wanted to see it, and, I've told him so much about it. It would mean a lot." I stared out the kitchen window, eyes unfocused, hand gripping the edge of the counter. Willow Cottage. The only place that still felt like us. It was where she learned to ride a bike, where we spread David's ashes. The last sacred thing we hadn't lost. She wanted to use it like it was a hotel. "You don't even use it that much anymore," she added, misreading my silence. "We'll take care of everything. Clean sheets, dishes, no worries." I should have said no. I should have asked why I wasn't included in her wedding, or why she only called when she needed something. But instead, I heard myself say, "Of course, sweetheart. I'll leave the keys in the mailbox." There was a beat of silence on her end. Then, "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." I wanted it to mean something. Maybe she'd remember being 10 years old and watching the fireworks from the dock, wrapped in the same quilt I still kept in the guest room. Maybe she'd see the chipped blue paint on the windowsill and remember how we used to carve initials into the wood. I hoped the cottage would do what I no longer could, remind her of who we were. I spent that Thursday scrubbing every surface. I baked a pie, left fresh towels folded neatly in the bathroom, arranged wildflowers in the old ceramic vase she once made in middle school. When I locked the door and slipped the keys into an envelope, I kissed it like it was a blessing. On Friday evening, I drove into town to pick up groceries. As I parked, I noticed a woman stepping out of the local cafe holding hands with a man who looked eerily familiar. It took me a moment, then my heart jolted. It was Elena, but it wasn't Garrett. She was laughing, eyes locked with someone taller, younger, bearded. They moved with the ease of people who knew each other well, and on her left hand, no ring. I ducked behind a row of parked cars, breath caught in my throat. They walked down the street, turned into the bookstore, and disappeared. I sat in my car for a long time after that. When I finally got home, I opened my laptop and searched Elena's name again. Her engagement post had been taken down. Her relationship status was blank. There was no trace of Garrett anywhere. There had been no wedding, no papers, no husband, just a lie, designed to gain access to the one place she knew I held dearest. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the fan spinning shadows across the walls like quiet accusations. My mind circled the image of Elena with that stranger, laughing, unguarded, no diamond on her hand, no trace of a marriage. Why had she lied? What was the point of inventing a wedding, a husband, a honeymoon, only to use the lake house? The next morning, I pulled out the deed to Willow Cottage from the fireproof lockbox in my closet. The paper was aged but familiar. My name, Margaret Ruth Thompson, was typed clearly at the top, sole owner since 1997. But a strange unease settled in my gut. I had never shared the property, never co-signed anything, never promised it away. And yet, a gnawing thought whispered, was someone trying to change that? I drove into town and requested a property history report from the county records office. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, printed the file and handed it over with a polite smile. "Looks like there were a couple of recent inquiries," she said casually. "Someone asked about transfer procedures last month." My stomach twisted. Someone? She flipped through the system. And Elena Thompson. She asked for the process to transfer ownership from parent to child. Didn't file anything, just information. I thanked her and left quickly, the folder pressed tight against my chest. In the car, I sat for a long time, staring at the ink on the page. She hadn't just lied about getting married. She was researching how to legally take ownership of the cottage without telling me. I thought about the timing, the distance, the cooling conversations, the abruptness of her honeymoon request. It wasn't a whim, it was a plan. And I had walked right into it, smiling as I handed over the keys. Still, I wanted to be wrong. I wanted there to be a rational explanation. Maybe she was just curious. Maybe she assumed she'd inherit it someday and wanted to prepare. Maybe... Back home, I opened the dusty desktop computer I hadn't used in ages and searched her name on professional databases. Her firm's website still listed her as a senior associate in estate law. Funny, I thought bitterly, how neatly her specialty aligned with this sudden interest in property. Then I made a mistake, one of those impulsive decisions born of fear and heartbreak. I clicked on her LinkedIn profile. Her most recent post was a shared article titled, "Dealing with Controlling Parents During Estate Planning." The caption read, "Too many adult children suffer in silence. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to protect your peace." It had hundreds of likes. My eyes skimmed the comments. This hits home. My mom freaked when I told her I wasn't inviting her to my wedding. "Thank you for saying this out loud. I thought I was the only one." Then I saw it. A reply Elena had left under one of the comments. "It's been a journey, but I had to prioritize my mental health. Toxic loyalty isn't love. Toxic loyalty." I stared at those words as if they might dissolve under pressure. Toxic loyalty. My chest ached with something deeper than betrayal. It was the pain of being erased. She wasn't just distancing herself, she was rewriting our history, casting me as the villain in a story where she played the brave survivor. She was building a narrative, one where I was the overbearing mother who clung too tightly, who controlled too much, who needed to be cut off for her well-being, and people were believing her. That night, I called an old friend, Helen, a retired judge, someone who'd known Elena since she was in Girl Scouts. We hadn't spoken in months, but I needed perspective. I needed truth. "Margaret," Helen said after I told her everything, "I don't know what Elena's endgame is, but this isn't normal behavior. She's not just creating boundaries. She's constructing distance and justification. Justification for what? For why she's about to do something that would otherwise look cruel." I sat in silence, heart pounding. Helen sighed. "Protect yourself, legally, emotionally. She's not the same girl who built sandcastles at the lake, and you're not crazy for seeing that." I thanked her and hung up. The stars outside were blurred behind tears. I didn't realize I'd been holding back. I stepped out onto the porch, wrapped myself in the old quilt Elena once loved, and watched the moon shimmer on the lake. Some goodbyes aren't shouted. They're written in silence, in missing invitations, in stories told to strangers. And this one was cold. I've always believed that when you raise a child alone, you build your world around them in ways that run deeper than most people understand. Every achievement they have feels like your own. Every stumble cuts like it happened to your own skin. That's what motherhood felt like for me, an invisible tether between Elena and me, unbroken even during the hardest seasons. Or so I thought. After discovering she'd tried to transfer Willow Cottage into her name and painted me as an emotionally toxic parent online, something inside me hardened, not in bitterness, but in resolve. If she had gone to such lengths, what else was she hiding? I didn't want to become paranoid. I wanted to be sure. So I started small. The first step was a visit to my local bank. I'd banked there for decades, and the manager, Thomas, had once taught Elena how to open her first savings account at age 11. I asked him, gently, if any inquiries or transactions had been made involving my name that I wasn't aware of. His brow furrowed as he typed something into the system. "Well," he said slowly, "there was a loan application submitted last year. A co-signed credit line with your name listed, but it never went through. Denied due to incomplete documentation." My stomach dropped. My name was on it? "Yes, Margaret. Elena Thompson listed you as co-signer. You didn't know?" I shook my head. "I never signed anything." He leaned back. "It may have been an error, or maybe she assumed pre-approval, but you might want to check your credit activity." I left the bank with a folder and a hollow feeling that no amount of paperwork could soothe. That night, I pulled up my credit report online for the first time in years. There, buried beneath utility accounts and my decades-old mortgage, were several hard inquiries I didn't recognize. 2 from luxury credit cards, 1 from an online lending service, and another from a private financial firm in Boston. My hands trembled as I scrolled. What was she doing? The next day, I visited a friend, Janet, who worked as a paralegal for a financial law firm. She owed me a favor, and I asked her to help me discreetly search public financial filings related to Elena's firm and any business connections she might have. 3 days later, Janet called, her voice lower than usual. "Maggie, I don't know how to say this gently, but Elena's in deep." "What do you mean?" "She has outstanding credit lines in 6 figures, luxury purchases, travel expenses, and she's recently been investigated quietly for potential connections to a failing hedge fund, Zenith Capital." I blinked. "I don't understand. She's a lawyer." "Yes, but it looks like she might have acted as a financial advisor for private investors through a side entity. There are whispers of mismanagement, unregulated investments. She was never officially charged, but her name was mentioned in internal memos we accessed." I sat in stunned silence. "She's being watched," Janet added quietly, "and from the looks of it, she's running out of options." That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stared at the corkboard I'd set up in my study. I pinned up copies of the loan inquiry, the credit checks, the Zenith Capital articles. In the center, I pinned her photo, one I'd taken of her at age 5, holding a seashell at Willow Cottage, joy radiating from her tiny face. What had she become? Still, something didn't add up. If she was in debt, why hadn't she asked me for help? Why lie about a wedding? Why spin a narrative instead of just talking to me? Then I remembered something Thomas had said. The loan had been denied due to incomplete documentation. But what if it hadn't been denied? What if others had approved, trusting her because of the name she carried? I dug through her firm's public portfolio. I found a sponsorship she'd listed just months prior, claiming to represent Margaret Thompson Educational Fund. There was no such fund. But the name? That name carried weight. I had spent years volunteering, mentoring, teaching. My reputation in the region was solid. Elena hadn't just borrowed money. She had borrowed me. My image, my life, my credibility. A few more calls and I uncovered the most damning detail yet. She had used a allegedly signed by me, endorsing her as a responsible heir and financial steward. It had been part of an investor packet submitted to a private real estate deal in Boston. The letter was professionally formatted, convincing, and entirely fake. I recognized my signature. It looked perfect. But I had never written those words. The shock turned to nausea. She hadn't just lied, she had impersonated me for gain, for credibility, for money. The woman who once cried in my lap after her first heartbreak had forged my name for access to strangers' investments. I sat at my desk, head in hands, as the weight of it settled into my bones. She wasn't spiraling. She wasn't lost. She was calculating, and I was her currency. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I'd seen lies before. Small ones, white lies, even painful ones. But this was different. This wasn't a child hiding a bad grade or a teenager sneaking out. This was deception dressed in strategy. Elena had used my name, my history, and my reputation to gain access to a world she couldn't enter on her own. And for what? A bigger apartment? Fancier vacations? Prestige? I kept telling myself she must have been desperate. Desperation makes people reckless. But it wasn't just the forgeries or the fake narrative about me being emotionally unstable. It was how deliberate everything felt. Still, the last sliver of hope clung to the idea that maybe she hadn't meant to go so far. Maybe someone else had pushed her. Maybe Garrett or the faceless partners behind Zenith Capital. Maybe she was being blackmailed, coerced, manipulated. I clung to that narrative for longer than I'd like to admit, until I heard her voice. It happened by accident. I was sorting through a box of old receipts and bills I'd gathered from the guest room she used to stay in. In the bottom of a drawer, tucked inside a manila envelope labeled Utilities Cottage, I found a USB drive. It was labeled Q3 Planning, ET. I almost threw it away, assuming it was an old work file. But something about it felt off. Elena had always been meticulous. She never left things behind. I plugged it into my laptop and found 3 audio files. The first 2 were mundane, brief phone recordings discussing scheduling and investment jargon I didn't understand. The third, however, was different, longer, more personal. It opened mid-sentence, Elena's voice sharp and confident. "Look, the window's closing. If I don't lock it down before the end of the quarter, the opportunity's gone." A man's voice replied, muffled but calm. "What are the current obstacles?" She laughed. "Nothing serious, it's just legal stuff. But don't worry, I'm working on getting around that. The house will be mine before the quarter ends." I froze. "The house?" she continued, tone casual like she was talking about buying a pair of shoes. "My mother's too sentimental to fight. She still thinks I'm her little girl. If I time it right, emotionally, I'll have her handing over the deed with a smile." The man asked something I couldn't quite make out. Then her reply, "Worst case, I push the dependency angle again. She's a retired school teacher, living alone. There's room to argue diminished capacity if it goes to court. But it won't. She won't fight me." I slammed the laptop shut. My heart was hammering. I sat there, unable to breathe, the air sucked out of my lungs by a daughter who was planning to destroy me with the same quiet, calculated tone she once used to read bedtime stories. She wasn't desperate. She wasn't coerced. She was methodical. And she was counting on me to be too soft, too naive, too loyal to stop her. I pressed my palm against my chest and whispered, "My God, what have you become?" The memories came rushing in. Her first day of school, her graduation, the time she broke her wrist climbing the oak tree in our backyard. I had loved her fiercely, wholly, the way only a single mother can. I had forgiven tantrums, teenage outbursts, lies about parties, heartbreaks, and every sharp word we ever exchanged. But I couldn't forgive this, because this wasn't a mistake. This was an execution plan. I sat at the dining table, the USB drive in my hand, and realized something chilling. I had to protect myself from my own daughter. There was no confrontation, not yet. I knew better than to tip her off. If she was this calculating, she'd already thought about how to cover her tracks. I needed evidence, concrete proof. I bought a notebook and started documenting everything. Dates, conversations, screenshots. I printed out every email, every online post where she alluded to my control issues. I gathered the credit checks, the fake endorsement letter, and now the recording. Every puzzle piece now pointed to the same picture. Elena wasn't a victim of circumstance or overwhelmed by pressure. She was a predator, one that wore my last name. It was a grief I'd never known, more violent than death, more cruel than betrayal. I hadn't just lost my daughter, I discovered she'd been carving away at me for months, maybe years, all while smiling and saying, "Love you, Mom." I could have folded. I could have buried it, told myself I misunderstood. But something fierce ignited in me. A line had been crossed, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story of my life. She thought I was too old, too soft, too wrapped in nostalgia to fight back. She'd forgotten who raised her. The wind was sharp that morning, rustling the trees outside Willow Cottage like whispers of all the things I didn't want to do, but had to. I stood in the kitchen, the table covered in papers, documents, screenshots, notarized records, and one slim black USB drive. It was all there. Everything Elena had done, everything she had said, and it was time she saw it laid bare, without the filter of her ambition or the fantasy of getting away with it. I wrapped the contents in soft parchment, placed them into a white box, and tied it with a navy ribbon. A note went on top. A wedding gift. From the mother you no longer need. I drove to her Boston apartment building just after noon. I didn't go inside. I left the box at the concierge desk with her name written in calligraphy, my handwriting steady despite the shaking in my chest. By the time I got home, the phone was already ringing. I let it go to voicemail twice. On the third call, I picked up. "You've lost your mind." Her voice sliced through the air, not shrill, but icy, composed, measured. It was the same voice she used when cross-examining witnesses on mock trial teams back in law school. "Elena," I said steady, "did you open it?" "Oh, I opened it," she snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I gave you the truth." "You gave me a threat," she spat. "You think you can scare me with documents, with out-of-context files? You think that recording proves anything?" "It proves enough," I replied, fingers tightening around the phone. There was a pause, then laughter, low, cold, humorless. "Mom, you're not a lawyer. You're a retired teacher who doesn't understand how the world works anymore. You don't have anything." My breath caught. "Elena, I have your voice saying you'd exploit me to get the house." "I said nothing illegal," she countered. "I said what any person planning their financial future would say. There's no crime in strategy." "You forged my name." "You can't prove that I did," she said calmly. "And even if you could, do you really want to drag your name into court at your age? You think the town you love so much would side with the crazy old lady accusing her daughter of theft over a summer home?" She'd said it with such clarity, such practiced detachment, that it took me a full moment to process the words. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was an obstacle, a liability, something to be removed cleanly and efficiently. "Elena, you used my life, my name, my legacy, as a pawn." "No," she said flatly. "I used the foundation you gave me. I took the tools I was raised with and applied them better than you ever could. That's not betrayal. That's evolution." It was the cruelest thing she'd ever said to me, and she said it without a flicker of remorse. "You don't get to play victim," she continued. "You've always controlled the narrative. You've made me into your precious project, your second chance at love, your only purpose. But I don't owe you my life." "I never asked for your life," I whispered. "Just your honesty. You want honesty?" Her voice sharpened. "Fine. I don't care about Willow Cottage. I care about the value, the leverage, the asset. You held it over me my whole life, told me I'd get it someday if I behaved, if I stayed close, if I kept calling every Sunday. You don't own me with memories, Mom. I stood there, a lifetime of summers crashing like waves in my ears. You've made your choice then, I said quietly. I made it a long time ago, she replied. You just weren't paying attention. Then came the twist, the pivot that told me she hadn't just been trying to scare me. Everything I've done has been legal, she said, slow and deliberate. You can wave your little folder of papers around all you want, but unless you plan to sue me, none of it matters. What if I do? She laughed again. You won't, because you'd rather suffer in silence than be the mother who dragged her daughter to court. You'd rather keep up appearances. Keep being Margaret Thompson, the beloved widow, the nurturing teacher. You don't have it in you to fight dirty, but I do. And just like that, she hung up. The line went dead, but the silence after felt louder than anything she'd said, because for the first time, I understood the full truth. She wasn't just aiming to inherit the cottage someday. She wanted to seize it now while I was still alive, still breathing, still able to watch her take everything I'd built and twist it into a transaction. That night, I sat alone in the sunroom, candlelight flickering across the walls. I listened to the recording again, her voice so casual, so certain. The house will be mine before the quarter ends. And I knew then that I wasn't done. I wasn't finished protecting what mattered. Not from Elena. Not anymore. After the call ended, I sat in stillness for a long time. The wind outside had quieted. The trees no longer rustled with urgency. But inside me, a different kind of storm was settling. It wasn't rage. Not anymore. It was grief. The kind of grief that doesn't announce itself with sobs, but with quiet understanding. My daughter wasn't coming back. Not the girl I raised. Not the woman I believed she'd become. But even as that truth sat heavy in my chest, another one burned brighter. I had to do something. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She was wrong. The next morning, I made a call. It took 2 connections and 1 hesitant referral, but I eventually reached him. Simon Greer, a seasoned investigative journalist who had once exposed a major regional nonprofit for embezzlement. I remembered the headlines. I remembered how he'd handled it with clarity and tact, never sensationalizing, always focusing on facts. He had a reputation for protecting victims and exposing predators. He answered after 3 rings. Greer speaking. Mr. Greer, my name is Margaret Thompson. I believe I have a story you'll want to hear, but it's complicated and painful. I like complicated, he said without pause. Tell me what you have. We met in person 2 days later at a small cafe on the edge of town. I brought a folder. He brought a recorder. We sat in a quiet booth, and for the first time, I told the whole story, starting from the engagement lie, through the fake financial endorsements to the forged documents, and finally, the recording. Simon didn't speak for several minutes after I finished. He scanned my notes, listened to the audio twice, and then leaned back. You're not imagining this, he said softly. She's calculating, strategic. You're not the first mother this has happened to, but this story has teeth, especially given your background. My background? I asked. You're respected, he said. Your name has value. You're not just a mother. You're a public figure in a way, former educator, community advocate. If this happened to you, it could happen to anyone. I nodded. I don't want revenge, I said. I want the truth to live somewhere outside my own head. I want people to see the truth for what it is. He nodded. Then we do this carefully, legally. No accusations without proof. No names until the evidence lines up. We build the story piece by piece. And so we did. Over the next several weeks, Simon and I exchanged emails, scanned documents, and filed Freedom of Information requests. He conducted quiet interviews with people from Elena's firm, former classmates, and a few anonymous financial advisors who had worked with Zenith Capital. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed. A young woman with a sharp mind and fading reputation, tied to investment schemes, whisper campaigns against her mother, and a growing stack of debts hidden beneath designer shoes and perfect smiles. But even as the case grew stronger, my resolve was tested. One night, while sorting old letters in the attic, I came across a card Elena had written me on my 60th birthday. It was simple, handwritten in her loopy, elegant script. "You are everything I am and everything I hope to become. Thank you for never giving up on me. I love you always." I pressed the card to my chest, and for the first time since the storm began, I let myself cry. Because I didn't hate her. Even after everything, I didn't hate her. I hated what she had done, yes. I hated the manipulation, the betrayal, the coldness of her ambition. But underneath it all, I still saw the girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms. The girl who once cried when she thought I wouldn't be proud of her B+ in calculus. I didn't want her ruined. I wanted her to stop. I wanted her to look at herself, really look, and realize what she'd become. I wanted her to choose differently before it was too late. I told Simon that, one morning over tea and scones at my kitchen table. "I don't want this to end in flames," I said, staring at the rim of my cup. "I want her to have a chance to own what she's done, to change. I know how naive that sounds, but I'm her mother." Simon nodded. "It doesn't sound naive. It sounds human." And with that, we adjusted the approach. The story would still be told, but we'd hold the publication until after I confronted Elena with the evidence. One last chance, one final moment of mercy. "You're giving her an out," Simon said, "but you're doing it on your terms." Exactly. I wasn't coming at her with threats or scandal. I was coming with truth. Quiet, undeniable truth. And what she chose to do with it would define her future. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't sensational. It didn't use her name. But anyone who knew the circles Elena moved in, anyone who'd heard whispers of her rising star, would understand exactly who it was about. When Reputation Masks Intent, an investigative look into strategic inheritance manipulation by Simon Greer. It was surgical. He wrote about a successful young lawyer who'd quietly leveraged her aging mother's name and standing to secure private investments, credit lines, and real estate influence without consent. He outlined how reputations can be weaponized, how family trust can be exploited, and how ambition, when left unchecked, can turn love into leverage. Simon didn't need to shout. The truth was loud enough. By noon, the piece had spread across local forums, legal circles, and even a few national watchdog groups. By 3 p.m., the firm where Elena worked released a statement. Effective immediately, attorney Elena Thompson has been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. The word pending did a lot of heavy lifting, but in legal circles, administrative leave without pay meant we're getting ready to cut ties. I watched it unfold from the quiet of my sunroom, cup of tea in hand, heart pounding, not with glee, but with dread. This was necessary. I knew that. I had done everything in my power to offer her the truth before the world did. She didn't take it. And now, the world was watching. The next blow came quietly. I received a formal letter from Oak Hill National Bank. They had launched an internal review into a joint loan application submitted last year using my name as co-signer. The documents, clearly forged, were under scrutiny, and the bank requested my cooperation in providing a formal affidavit. I signed it the same day. Then came the call from a former client of Elena's, asking gently if I was okay. The subtext was clear. The article had legs. People were connecting the dots. By Friday evening, there were at least 3 financial blogs dissecting the article line by line. They speculated about the identity of the subject, highlighted inconsistencies in public filings, and noted the suspicious disappearance of the Margaret Thompson Educational Fund from a recent charity registry. And through it all, I waited. I knew she'd come. When the storm arrived, it did so quite literally. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder growled low across the lake. I was settling into bed when I heard the knock, sharp, insistent, soaked in desperation. I opened the front door slowly, and there she was, Elena, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her face, eyes wild, mouth set in a line that screamed fury. "You did this!" Her voice cracked like the thunder overhead. "Elena, no!" she snapped, stepping inside uninvited. Water pooled around her boots. "Don't act surprised. Don't pretend this wasn't your plan from the start. You wanted to destroy me." I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. "That article?" she said, voice trembling. "Everyone knows it's me. I've had clients cancel, reporters call. My firm froze my accounts. My life is collapsing." "And mine?" I asked softly. "When you tried to steal my name, my property, my dignity, what was I supposed to do? Let it happen quietly?" She laughed, but there was no joy in it. "You didn't protect yourself. You humiliated me." "You humiliated yourself," I said. "I gave you every chance, Elena. I asked you to stop. I sent you the truth before the world ever saw it." She stepped closer, eyes blazing. "You're going to contact that journalist. You're going to demand he retract it. Or I swear I'll sue you for defamation, for breach of privacy, for emotional distress, whatever I can throw." I looked at her. This storm-drenched figure who used to cling to me after nightmares, who once whispered, "Don't ever leave me, Mommy." "You'd really take your own mother to court." "You took me there first," she hissed. "You just used a reporter instead of a judge." The rain howled outside. I said nothing. Neither did she. Then quietly she turned and walked out, leaving muddy footprints behind her like scars. The rain hadn't let up. Sheets of it danced across the porch like ghostly curtains, and the wind was howling like something feral out in the woods. I stood in the open doorway watching Elena storm off into the dark, her silhouette vanishing into the trees. But I didn't shut the door. I couldn't. "Wait," I called out. She stopped, half-turned, her expression unreadable in the dim porch light. "You're soaked. Come inside. We can talk." She hesitated. For a second, I saw that flicker of vulnerability. The daughter, not the lawyer. Then she nodded and walked back toward the house, drenched and defiant. I made tea while she stripped off her wet coat and wrapped herself in the same wool blanket she used to hide under when watching thunderstorms as a child. For several minutes, we sat in silence at the kitchen table, steam curling between us from 2 untouched mugs. Then she said it. "You think I'm heartless." I didn't answer. "I lost something too, you know," she whispered, her voice rough. "Not just my job or my name, I lost a child." I looked up sharply. She was staring into the steam, eyes glassy but unblinking. "I was pregnant," she said, "a few months ago, just before all of this blew up, and I lost it. The stress, the tension with you, the fear. It was too much." Tears slid down her face now, slow, silent, cutting. "I didn't tell anyone, not Garrett, not the firm. I didn't even know how to say it out loud, but I wanted to keep that baby. I was going to change everything. Elena. I thought if I just secured the house, made sure we had something safe, something stable, it would be okay. But you made me feel like I was drowning. Like I could never be enough for you unless I followed your rules. And now..." Her voice cracked. "Now I have nothing." She sobbed into her hands, shoulders shaking, the same way she used to cry as a teenager after a brutal exam or a breakup. And for a moment, just one, I felt it, the urge to reach across the table, to say, "It's okay. to pull her close, to forget. But something inside me stopped. Not anger, not revenge, just something that said, wait. I reached into the drawer and quietly opened the folder I hadn't yet shared with her. Inside was the final piece Simon had discovered during his investigation. Something I hadn't planned to use unless she pushed again. A medical verification form from a clinic she had claimed to visit, dated 3 weeks after the alleged miscarriage. Notes from a routine appointment. No pregnancy ever recorded. No loss ever reported. And the physician's name, my old student, now a nurse practitioner, who'd quietly told Simon, "No, Margaret, I would have remembered something like that." I didn't show her the paper, not yet. Instead, I simply asked, "Why now, Elena? Why tell me this now?" She froze, wiped her eyes, sniffed. "Because I thought maybe you'd care. Or maybe because your firm's investigating you and you need sympathy before the board hearing next week." Her face twitched. I continued, voice low. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this. But you lied, over and over. You made me into a villain so you could play victim." "That's not fair," she whispered. "No," I said, sliding the folder across the table. "This isn't fair." She opened it, brows furrowing as she scanned the medical form. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. You weren't pregnant, Elena." She sat still, for the first time, completely still. Not even that part of your story was true. The silence between us stretched, jagged and heavy. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold again, professional. "I suppose this is the part where you tell me to leave." "No," I said quietly. "This is the part where I ask, why?" A long pause, then almost a whisper. "Because it was easier to manipulate guilt than face the consequences." I stared at her, heart breaking even as I nodded. "Thank you. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in months." She stood. The blanket fell from her shoulders like a discarded skin. "I should go." "Yes," I said, "you should." But I didn't follow her out. This time, I shut the door. The morning I filed the civil suit, the courthouse was quiet, just the shuffling of papers and the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I walked past a mural I used to admire, one that spoke of justice, balance, and truth. Funny how easy those words had sounded once. How clean. Now they felt heavier, more personal, more earned. The petition was simple, clear. I was suing my daughter, Elena Thompson, for financial fraud, forgery, and willful misrepresentation in the pursuit of personal gain through falsified documentation bearing my name. The clerk didn't blink, just stamped the papers and said, "We'll be in touch." A week later, she was served. To be clear, I didn't want to do this. I hadn't woken up one morning craving revenge. I didn't want to see her humiliated. I wanted accountability, not destruction. I wanted the lies to stop, on paper, in court, and in the quiet corners of my heart, where I still hoped for the girl I raised to come back to me. The courtroom was smaller than I remembered. Just rows of benches, a low bench for the judge, and that awkward microphone that always made people sound more brittle than they were. Elena arrived in a gray blazer, hair pulled back, eyes distant. She didn't look at me. Her lawyer tried the obvious defenses first: emotional distress, misunderstanding, familial confusion. He even argued that I'd encouraged dependency through years of maternal overreach. Simon sat in the second row taking notes. He never looked away. My lawyer, Patricia Ward, was quiet and precise. A retired legal aid volunteer from the county circuit, she didn't posture. She presented. And when she played the audio recording, Elena's voice saying, "The house will be mine before the quarter ends," even the bailiff looked uncomfortable. Then came the forged documents, the bank letters, the fabricated endorsement, the Margaret Thompson Educational Fund that never existed. One by one, the lies collapsed under their own weight. Elena didn't speak. She didn't take the stand. Her silence was strategic, her eyes fixed on something far behind me, something she didn't want to see up close. After 3 days of testimony, the verdict was delivered. guilty on all civil counts. Elena was ordered to pay restitution for the unauthorized loans opened under my name, publicly relinquish all claims to Willow Cottage, be legally removed from all existing inheritance documents related to my estate. But I had added one more clause, one the judge paused over, brow raised. A final condition, a trust fund carved from what remained of my assets to be placed under the stewardship of a local education foundation. The fund would support scholarships for underprivileged young women in law school. It would be called the Elena Thompson Integrity Grant. Elena flinched when she heard it, just slightly. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper confused. Patricia explained on my behalf. The plaintiff wishes to honor the name of the daughter she once believed in, not as a gift, but as a reminder. The scholarship is not about redemption. It's about what could have been. There was no applause, no smiles, just silence. And then, court was adjourned. I walked out slowly. No rush. The sunlight outside the courthouse was warm, softer than I expected. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted by my own memories. I wasn't a woman at war with her past. I was something else now, whole. Later that week, I returned to Willow Cottage and sat on the back porch with a mug of tea. Simon called to say the final follow-up piece was being published. He asked if I had any regrets. I thought for a long time before answering. I didn't win, I said. I survived. He nodded, even through the phone. Sometimes that's the greater victory. That night, I placed the first donation into the Elena Thompson Integrity Grant. It wasn't much, just enough to help one girl in one semester believe she belonged in a courtroom. The irony didn't escape me, but neither did the hope, because some truths aren't just revealed in court. They're reclaimed in action, in legacy, in the quiet resolve to choose light over bitterness. Elena never called again, and I never stopped loving her. But love, I've learned, does not mean silence or surrender. Sometimes love looks like boundaries, like standing in front of a judge and saying, "No more." Sometimes it looks like walking away from the person you raised so they can face the person they've become. And sometimes it looks like a scholarship, quietly placed under a name you still remember with tenderness, even after everything. Because love, in its most painful and powerful form, still hopes, even in the aftermath. The seasons changed softly that year. Summer melted into a golden autumn, and by winter, Willow Cottage stood wrapped in a hushed quiet that only snow could bring. I tended my garden, read thick novels I used to save for someday, and walked the lakeside path every morning, breathing in the crisp air with the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just settles, quietly. A year had passed, 12 months since the verdict, since the courtroom, since the headlines. The media had moved on, the town had moved on, and I'd stayed still, not frozen, not bitter. Just still, anchored in something I hadn't felt in years, my own center. I never heard from Elena again. No calls, no emails, no drama. Until one morning, just after the spring crocuses bloomed, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I would recognize anywhere. Elena's. I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it. The porch was quiet. The wind moved gently through the wind chimes, making a sound like distant memory. I opened the letter. It was written on plain paper. No greeting, no sign-off, just words. Raw, unscripted. I don't know how to begin this because I don't know who I'm writing to anymore. The woman I betrayed? The mother I destroyed? Or the part of you that still remembers me as your daughter? I was angry at the world, angry that success wasn't enough, that control slipped through my fingers even when I worked the hardest. And I turned that anger on you because you were the easiest target. You loved me. That made you safe to hurt. I used your name. I twisted your trust. I built walls and told others you were the reason I was so guarded. when the truth was, I was ashamed of the choices I made, of the things I justified, the lie about the pregnancy. That was the worst. I knew it would break you, and I said it anyway, because I was losing control, and I wanted you to feel as lost as I did. There's no excuse for it, only explanation. I lost everything, Mom. The job, the connections, the version of myself I used to be proud of. But maybe that's what had to happen for me to see the truth. You weren't controlling. You were consistent. You weren't overbearing. You were present, and I was too afraid to admit that I never deserved the loyalty you kept offering me. You gave me a way out. Quietly. Cleanly. And I spit on it. You fought back, but not with rage, with truth. You didn't humiliate me. You let me do that to myself. And then you honored my name with a scholarship I didn't earn. There is no forgiveness coming in this letter. I don't expect it. I don't deserve it. I only want you to know this. I remember the version of you who read to me when I was sick, who stayed up through the night before my college interviews, who cried harder than I did when I got rejected from Columbia. You were never the enemy. I was. I don't know who I am yet, but I know who I don't want to be anymore. And if you ever do speak my name again, I hope it's with the grace you've always shown, even when I gave you nothing in return. I love you. I failed you. I'm sorry. I'm not ready to be your daughter again, but I hope someday I will be. I didn't cry at first. I folded the letter carefully and walked to the meadow behind the cottage. The grass was tall and wild, full of color. Daisies, bluebells, wild chamomile, all bursting with life. The wind kissed my cheeks and the lake shimmered just beyond the trees. I sat on the soft grass and read the letter again. This time, the tears came. But not the kind that wrench your chest, not the tears of grief or betrayal. They came gently, as if something inside had been holding its breath for far too long. Because I knew, finally and fully, that I had done the right thing, not by fighting her, but by choosing not to be her victim, by choosing truth, by choosing legacy over resentment. The letter didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the courtroom or the lies or the pain, but it was a seed. And maybe, with time, something honest might grow from it. Maybe someday she would return, not as the daughter who took, but as the woman who understood. For now, though, I had the quiet, the peace, and the knowledge that silence, when earned, isn't emptiness, it's victory. Not every story ends with a hug. Some end with a woman sitting alone in a field of flowers, reading a letter that doesn't promise reunion, but redemption. And that's enough.